Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast where we talk about all the things that you are not supposed to talk about at the dinner table. My name is Alex.
And I am Zach.
Welcome back. We have a couple of quick timely things here, especially picking up from our last episode. So hopefully you have listened to that. Let me bring up the list here, Zach. I have a comment on one of the things that you said in the last episode. So to take everyone back, or if you haven't listened to it, we were talking about some future tech ideas. Zach, you were going into about how what tech is really replacing are like our tasks. Mm-hmm. And so we're pulling more and more tasks into, we were talking about our phone, but just into technology and all of those types of things. And you brought up a really, really cool one, and I want to kind of take it from a different angle. So you brought up grocery shopping.
Yes.
And how that's sort of being replaced, especially when you can add food or even like Postmates food to yourselves or things like that. So I guess I have two things to say. Number one thing we didn't talk about that tech does is cutting out middlemen. And think about all the apps and things that have now sort of gone around a traditional means of buying or setting up a service or something like that. Cut out a middleman, and you just go straight to this app and do this thing. We also talked about banks, which is kind of this example. The bank still exists, but you don't have to go. Like, you're cutting out that trip.
Yeah. Well, so these are the two best examples I have of the fact that now we have mobile banking apps, so you really don't need to go to the bank. And I think we're kind of now getting into the cusp of less and less people are grocery shopping, really accelerated by the pandemic, but it seemed to be sort of naturally growing, people doing online shopping. I mean, the question is, are you cutting out the middleman? Or in some ways, I almost think you're cutting out tasks, but you're almost adding another layer in the middle of, like, now you have the software middle platform. Or in grocery shopping, now you have an app, right? So it's weird to call them a middleman, but there is like another layer in this overall transaction.
But I think there's both, because I was going down a road where you don't need grocery stores. Like, think about if there was a platform where I could just buy tomatoes from the farmer. Why do I need a grocery store?
That's true. I mean, I've heard of something, to go back to your Postmates example, I've heard of things called ghost kitchens. Have you ever heard this concept?
No.
Where they're basically making, like, I don't know how flushed out or like in production how many of these exist, but I heard with the rise of Postmates, Uber Eats, and all that sort of stuff, it would be way more cost effective to just set up a sort of kitchen in a warehouse and have all your fryers and whatever you need, and especially like basically have a McDonald's staff in there, but they take care of all of the Uber Eats digital orders. So anytime somebody orders, through Postmates or Uber Eats or anything like that, instead of actually going to your local McDonald's, now this would only work with the large economies of scale, like LA, New York, yada yada, but instead of going to just a typical McDonald's, you've got people just making things that the Uber Eats people go and pick up in these like ghost kitchens.
That's really interesting. This is exactly what I wanted to kind of talk about, because so what you're saying is I could order delivery from somewhere, but it's not actually coming from the restaurant. It's coming from a separate place that they've set up to do this more efficiently.
Right, where you have people who are trained in McDonald's, you have all the McDonald's recipes and stuff like that.
See, and then you could then get rid of some maybe underperforming restaurant locations almost in favor of this other thing. Like, there might be a tipping point where there are more people doing the delivery thing than even going to the restaurant, and the restaurants start to scale down.
Potentially. What's an interesting economic formula here is you have the fixed costs of the restaurant itself, just the typical McDonald's that you can walk into. So you want to obviously utilize those resources to the maximum benefit, right? And you don't want those employees just standing around or those fryers not running. So there's this weird kind of cool balance act, right, of equilibrium, where you want those people to be busy, but not too busy where there's long lines. So it's like you've got to ebb and flow the demand to, like, okay, I want to use my first line here, and then anytime demand spills over that, I want to go to the ghost kitchens. And so, yeah, as more and more people want to order in and not go somewhere, I would imagine the foundation or kind of the supply side of what we would see, how restaurants are organized, or, kind of how they run and the hours and that sort of stuff could respond to that need of doing more delivery. What I think would be really interesting, but would be super hard to do from a branding standpoint, is if you got a ghost kitchen and you train somebody who was proficient in Wendy's, Burger King, McDonald's, all of them, because it basically requires all the same stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And now you'd have to keep all the ingredients there. But if I can do this all with one set of staff, rather than all the different staffs and one set of grills, and if you could get all of them to play nice, your ghost kitchen could, in theory, take out all the, like, across the board, like across brands.
That's fascinating. Actually, I don't know if that would ever happen.
I don't think
the
it would either.
Companies would allow it, but
right.
Yeah, you'd be way more efficient than each of them individually. Yeah. And I was thinking, going down a road of making a grocery store, irrelevant. Like I could buy everything I need, all my fresh ingredients. There's a platform that I can just get it from the source, and someone will bring it to me. I don't ever have to go to a grocery store.
You're basically buying just from the warehouses that the grocery stores buy from, pretty much.
Yeah. Or even like a farm.
Yeah.
Which then there's a kind of a time decay element of fresh food. But if they could sell me the tomato at the price that they used to sell it to the grocery store for, they're making money. They could probably mark it up a little bit themselves. They're going to make more money, and I'm going to get a better price than I see on the shelf.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of exists today with farmers markets and co-ops and produce boxes that you can order directly from farms. But you're saying, like, technology allows you now to do it en masse.
I'm taking that online. I'm like a farmer's market virtually, strictly through apps and whatever platforms and things.
Well, I would think that just from an overall resource management standpoint, you'd still want to have one place that would collect all of it, where basically some middle point supplier. Yeah, a distributor, exactly. Like that warehouse, to me, I see it as the farmer still sells all of his tomatoes to the one person who's going to do logistics on this. And instead of that distributor or warehouse selling to grocery stores, they're just actually lining up, carts for people to either come pick up or grocery people to come pick up and run delivery. I mean, but I'm thinking about professions that sort of fit this, but no longer exist, like the milkman.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, that model kind of went away because of the convenience of being able to get milk at a normal grocery store. But it's almost like coming back around to say, well, I want to get all my groceries.
I never thought about that. It is almost going all the way back around. We've kind of done this before.
We've been here before.
Yeah. I mean, everything's cyclical, I guess. So, but it became more efficient to not have the milkman. And it's almost like it could become more efficient now to go back to that model.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to take this is out of left field, but it's a little bit along the lines of technology reopens a door. I am a pretty pro-capitalist kind of guy, right? I studied economics, sure. And I'm always open to hear cases about other ideas of like why people like socialism, why people like communism. Like, I don't think of them as a bad word as some other people do. I just think capitalism kind of uses the spirit of humanity and markets kind of solve. Not always perfectly, and that's why we have government and things like the EPA that I am a fan of, right? So like capitalism has problems too that you need to address. But I've been thinking about like a lot of the problems with communism or like huge state planning is that it's just too slow to react, or we just guess production wrong, like the government or whatever massive state does. But if you had a really, really good AI, like you had amazing information access, could you do something like socialism or communism because it can solve it and react appropriately? Because I think right now capitalism kind of works because we're all sharing information in real time about what we're buying and what we're not buying with prices, and like we're just kind of naturally through the market sharing all that information from I think of it almost like an evolutionary standpoint. But if we do get the tools that allow us to do that digitally or things like that, is there a case for socialism that opens up? And I'm like, I don't know. That's something I got to look into more. But it's kind of a larger picture look at, I think, what we're talking about here of, do we now with technology, we go back to a milkman-like grocery model because you can solve for things quicker at the digital level.
Well, that's a really interesting argument against those that say, like we've tried socialism and it failed. Maybe, yeah, but we didn't have necessarily the technology or the AI that you're talking about to do it better. I would tend to agree with you, though, that like capitalism to me just seems like that's what would logically happen. Someone's always going to try and do it better, get a better price, because that's how you get business. It just seems like that's how people are wired. That's sort of just logically stepping through, a small market to a large market. Some of those other things would involve intervention and some, some rules and things like that. Which I'm not saying capitalism shouldn't have those things. It should, but the logical steps sort of go down a capitalistic road, I think.
Yeah, I remember it was a wild day when I was sitting in an economics class in college, and it was getting explained to me, or the lesson we were going through was that in the very long term, like profit equals zero. Because in theory, if there's any profit sitting in an industry, another competitor would want to join in and get a slice of that profit. Profit means there's capability to step in and make money there, right? And so the idea really is, in theory, wherever there's profit, more competitors should show up and try and take a piece of that, and eventually the math works out where there's really no profit in the long term, which is wild, because then when you look at it, it's like, how can you say that? Like, Apple's making so much money, and then you get into the dynamics of like, well, are there perfect substitutes? What are the barriers of entry? Are there things like patents or knowledge, just speed access, relationships, yada, yada, yada. So like profit does exist, but like the math, in my understanding, is, like a company should go in and start making phones and like Apple does, and stealing some of their profits, because there's room for more companies there if profits exist, and for you to be able to cut margins and do all those sort of things.
I've never thought about it like that, but that does make sense. Yeah, for sure. One more thing too, just so that I don't forget, another sort of thought I had about cutting out the middleman. Do you think, especially in large cities, New York comes to mind, a lot of, they might already be going this way, I haven't been there in a while, but do you think as we move more and more into the future, is there even a point to have a kitchen in your house? Because someone else can do it cheaper and more efficiently and just bring you the food.
I would say yes, because I enjoy cooking, like the art of cooking.
So I agree.
It's a hobby.
I agree, but I'm sort of setting that aside for someone that doesn't.
Okay, so you've got some traveler or somebody who lives in a very small studio. Can I get such a cheap rent or something like that, almost, where I don't even need a kitchen because I can just have stuff?
Yeah, I mean, why waste square footage on that? I'm not saying now, because we're not quite there, but as we become even more efficient, or maybe some of these things we're talking about come to fruition, if I get a 600 square foot studio apartment or whatever, that's probably big for New York even, but they're like, whoa, yeah, luxury. Rip the kitchen out and give me some more space that way. Like there's a bedroom potential there, and you don't need to cook and make food. You can order everything from somewhere, or like there's restaurants obviously everywhere, which right now it's cheaper to cook at home, but could we hit a point where it flips?
Potentially. I'm thinking when I lived in London for 3 months,
great example.
My flat though, right, was basically a bathroom with a shower, and then there were beds and drawers in it with 2 desks, but the kitchen was a shared kitchen on the whole floor. So everybody on the floor just had a shared kitchen, right? Because where I'm going with this is like there's different tiers of this.
Yeah, that's like a middle step between the two.
Yeah, you got to imagine the people at WeWork, right? Back when WeWork was the hot wave, right? And like people were doing the renting offices and thinking about WeWork, and what their vision of the future was like the We Gym, the We Home, where like people live and work in the same spot. I would imagine somebody sat down and ran the numbers of like, what if we just had a cafe or a kitchen as part of this whole building, and we could sell rooms that didn't have kitchens, and when you're hungry, you go downstairs to the first floor and buy just from the cafe there.
So thinking through that, we're also describing a college experience where you live in a dorm.
Are we inventing college?
You go to a
now?
cafeteria where they have all the equipment and things to do it more efficiently, and you just get your bedroom basically being in a dorm. So yeah, there certainly is there's a headwind here of I want my own space to do what I want to do and blah, blah, blah on my time. You know, like you can rent a boat. Why do people buy boats? Well, it's because they want to do it whenever they want to and have it customized and all that kind of stuff too.
Well, and because it's more, you have to price in that uncertainty and security and risk with the renting. And so it's more expensive to buy from restaurants. And so people say, well, whatever, I'll take the time and go the cheaper route to make my own food. But yeah, so I mean, really your question is, are we ever going to get so efficient or kind of so cheap that people start leaning in a way that says, I'm just going to outsource or privatize all
I
of
don't
these
even need a kitchen because
food.
it's actually cheaper for me to just pull my phone up and go, I want tacos, and tacos show up at my doorstep.
Yeah, I mean, my gut sort of, it's an interesting question. I bet you there's some people that fit this, but the market's just so small because people do like the art of cooking or hosting or learning those things. But I bet there are people who would say that sounds interesting to them.
Yeah.
Right, to do that.
Right.
This makes me think a little bit, again, sorry, I'm very tangenty right now, but
what
you probably would still have in your room is like a microwave, right? In the office case that you want to, make some noodles or something like that. I was thinking about
which again is a college thing, very collegey thing.
Yeah, exactly. But you have a little bit of access if you want to do TV dinners or whatever. I was thinking about the term magical. Things that really are magical, right? Okay. Almost by definition, they're like non-scientifically explainable, right? If something is magical, really, we don't know how it happens or works, right? And so we have these ideas of things that sort of are magical, and then we study the science behind them, and then we say, okay, this really isn't magical anymore. We know how it works. The Earth revolves around the sun, and that's why the sun comes up in the way it does. Yada, yada. It's less magical. We sort of know it. I feel like the closest thing that I can still think of as magical is a microwave. You literally put something into it, punch in numbers, you can stare at it the whole time, nothing interacts with it, and you pull it out and it is piping hot, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
It is. People from the past who would come see this would think that you just did a spell in this box. And yes, I understand it's like food molecules vibrating, right? Is the science behind why microwaves work and can heat things up. And so it's like, okay, yeah, I kind of get your theory here, but this is still pretty damn magical that I have this box that can heat things up and I don't have to go get firewood and start a fire to.
That's true.
Make my cup of tea.
I'm thinking in my head about describing a new piece of technology to somebody and saying, yeah, it's just like it has 4 walls and you just put your food in there and then you wait 30 seconds and you pull it out and it's cooked. And people would be like, that sounds pretty cool. And then I go, yeah, that tech is 80 years old. Which is also crazy that they came up with this so long ago. Probably the 50s is when it really got, in most houses and things.
That's a good question. I mean, it's probably on the scientific or military front years before it actually gets commercialized.
Right. So it dates back past consumer adoption.
Yeah, exactly. It's my understanding too that the way people, the scientist who discovered it had a candy bar in his pocket and was working in a science lab and was doing something with radio waves, microwaves, and things like that. And the candy bar melted in his pocket, and that's how he was able to start going down this exploration of this is something's happening here, and
due to the waves
for a different example. Yeah.
So I did a quick 1946 is what I got on a quick search. So someone might say that date's wrong, but a quick internet search says 1946 was the invention.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, so it's funny thinking about the term magical, right? Like the true definition, because that term goes away as you explain the science behind something. But I look at something like a microwave, and that is still damn magical to me. That you can have that in your kitchen and get hot food in a moment's notice. And then maybe the next iteration of it will be I'm thinking about the movie Spy Kids, where they just put those little packets in and they press the button and a full plate of burger and fries pop out of the packet.
That's a good example too of tech that we use that I couldn't even begin to build my own version of it.
Right.
I wouldn't even know where to start. But this is we just said, this is an 80-year-old thing. And I use it, let's say I use it every day, right? And it's why don't you just build that thing you use every day? And I'd be I wouldn't even know where to start.
Right. I mean, yeah. Even if I got the smartest people together, maybe if you put me back in time 1,000 years, I could like come up with a version 1. It would be awful of a combustible engine because I understand a little bit of how it works. Right? If you got like the smartest people in the world together and you're like, here's roughly the blueprints, there's these pistons and you need to make little explosions.
I can give
and
you the gist.
Yeah. Yeah, but with a microwave, I'd be like, dude, I got no idea. We got to go make a deal with the devil if we want to figure out the plans for this one.
Your example is very similar to one that I've said in the past, which was if I was on a deserted island, I would have better luck trying to build a helicopter than like a computer. But I use a computer every day. I've literally never used a helicopter, but conceptually, I understand it much more than how a computer works.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'd be better off trying to do that. Which is
a computer at the end of the day is literally just a calculator that sorts zeros and ones, right? And so there's a very interesting scene in the book, The 3-Body Problem, where they build a computer out of groups of people. They build basically a computer out of thousands of people holding flags. And
you've brought this up before to me off air.
Around how they build gates and they're processing information by people pointing with flags. And then, they build up this whole system, and it's a military is how they use it. And you can see sort of the writing on the wall. It's not like they're kind of hiding that this is a computer. They're talking about this as the preliminary computer. But like, yeah, you could start there and make maybe a decent type calculator. But yeah, I agree with you. It'd probably have a better chance at making a helicopter. I wonder too if there's something to be said there about the fact that the helicopter was 1500s, 1600s, some of the original sketches, right? Didn't Leonardo da Vinci draw some sketches about a helicopter? I may be wrong on that, but
I don't know. It could be possible.
You're working with tangible things that create this experience of what you're trying to do with a helicopter rather than microscopic
that's true
silicon. And anytime you sort of get electrical, it gets a little bit harder to kind of fathom and process what you're doing because it's non-tangible.
If I used the same words and said I'm on a deserted island and I could build something from the 1600s versus something from the 2000s, it'd be like, well, yeah, obviously. But what I'm talking about is a helicopter. That does make the whole thing sound less impressive, actually. Or like, of course, like that. It makes it sound like, yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually, of why you'd be able to do one over the other. All right. Anything? I'm going to pivot if you don't have anything else to add. Or
one last thing. And I don't remember if I said this last time about the bank. So keep me honest if this was a conversation I had with somebody afterwards when I was talking about this. When you explain to most people probably like, oh yeah, there's these banking apps and it's so great, right? You don't have to go to the bank anymore. I agree with that. And you're getting a lot of time back in your day that you can now do what you want with it, whether that's watching Netflix or writing letters or learning a new skill, getting into carpentry, whatever it is. But I also think I almost think about this Jordan Peterson, are we throwing some of the baby out with the bathwater of like, you may lose a sense of community, right? Like people used to go to the bank and have conversations with tellers or see their neighbors. And so what else have we thrown out by automating that task away, where economically and personally, individually, it's a very good idea because I get more time in my day, but what are the other side effects of that? And I would be curious too, just thinking about the grocery example, what other side effects are we potentially throwing away or bringing on ourselves by automating that task out of our life?
That's a good observation. Yeah, we're certainly getting rid of all of those things. I mean, even just with something like fast food or like just big corporations where you used to go sit at a local coffee shop and now you just go to Starbucks, which I would still now be like, I'd rather do the coffee shop. But those types of things that we're certainly losing. That's a good comparison, though. I do like that. Yeah,
it makes me think a little bit about, I was having a conversation with somebody and it was a large conversation. We were kind of like, okay, what has happened to America or the world in the last 100 years and how do we like get to where we are now? It was a little bit of a conversation about like politically of like, why are we all at each other's throats and why is the pursuit of truth so hard, or why are people selfish? Why do we all watch Netflix? Just like kind of how did we get to where we are? And one thing that I've taken away and thought a lot about is like, it seems like over the last 100 or 200 years, there's been such a strong push for individual rights and liberties and just a focus on the individual that we've lost some sense of the community and care for your neighbors and patience and
Yeah, I could see
thinking that you could be wrong. And the internet has partially really just like accelerated this problem because you can go confirm whatever you want or find your social circles that will tell you like, no, you're right. You used to get made fun of if you thought the earth was flat, but then when you go online and put a bunch of thousands of people in the same forum agreeing with each other and being like, no, everyone else is wrong, you hold that belief rather than getting ridiculed.
And you get a megaphone. The internet gives you a megaphone for a belief like that.
So I'm merging two different things there, but I think the start is there's this kind of focus on the individual and individual rights that has kind of eroded some of that sense of community, and that's a little bit of why people think and act and are a little bit just more selfish. And then the focus on the people reinforcing their own views by the communities they do, sub-communities that they go into and select into and just want to reinforce their own views.
So I'm going to merge that idea with something that I've been feeling, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but I think this is actually really fitting. We've spoken off air about how I've been saying like, I just find myself watching TV a lot more or just doing unproductive things. I'm just consuming, right? And I think I've been having a thought recently of, do I just have so much more time due to the things that you're talking about? So it feels like I'm watching TV a lot more, and I am, but it's more because I just have so much more time. And I also think that's a reason people are at each other's throats, and the things like politics have sort of blown up recently, is people have time to sit and fight about
Argue.
Yeah. I used to in college, I was just thinking about this before we went on air here, with the bank example. 10 years ago in college, I would still walk to the bank and do my banking, like I would deposit a check there. So this is relatively new that I'm not doing that. And you've asked, what are we doing with that time? That's where all this extra time for me, I think, might be coming from, of like, man, I feel like I'm watching a lot of TV. Yeah, that's why, because you have so much more time.
Yeah, people have asked, I pack my schedule. It's just how I operate. I'm a bit of a busybody, and like to be involved in a lot of different things and communities and stuff like that. And people know if they want to get on my schedule, like ask me a week in advance, and I'll put it in my calendar and I'll hold it, and I will love to meet with people to go to dinner or whatever it is. But when I run through like, oh yeah, last week I did these 9 things, or like next week I have all of these things going on, people ask me, they're like, yo, how do you get all of this into your calendar? And my answer is, I don't watch television, right? Like I just like that is how I'm able to get to doing these different things, is because I just don't I'm not at a point in my life where I value that. That doesn't mean that maybe some point down the road when I have am in a relationship that wants that, or I live with somebody, or I have a kid and I can't go anywhere, maybe then I'll watch more television. But I highly value right now the fact that I can be free and do all these sort of things, and so television just takes a lower priority. And it sounds like you have had this, and I don't mean this to be accusatory, but you've had all this time free up, and you sort of are searching for what to fill it with, and in the time, TV has been the placeholder. Do you think that part of it is just where you're at in your life, that you're comfortable with your job, you're not putting like 60 or 70 hours in, and it could be that like some of your friends or your community that are people your age, because you're 30, right, have kids and are more involved with that. And so as you normally would have hung out with people or had communities and hang out with that sort of stuff, they've broken off and taken different paths. And so you're left with like, I just have to fill more and more from that as well, because my social community is taking this traditional route and I just haven't taken that traditional route.
That could be. That's probably part of it. I've also been thinking, what did I do differently beforehand?
That's a good question to ask yourself.
Yeah, and so I came up with like, I can remember going to friends' houses, or even like you and I going to parents' houses and things, and we would go just like play catch with a football. When's the last time you played catch with somebody?
Oh man.
But like, why? Why do things like that fall away? And now when you go to someone's house, you all sit in their living room and just like chat or watch something. Why? I'm just starting to look at those things and go, why aren't we throwing a frisbee around? Or like, why aren't we off doing something else like we used to do? And it's not necessarily one's better or worse, but just why did that happen?
Well, we do. The word I think that I'm bunching all this up into is play. we used to just play. And now we do that in certain ways where like you and I go golfing, right? Like that's a version of playing, right? But it's kind of very structured. It used to be as a kid, you just had very unstructured play. The first thing that bubbles to my mind is we're just tired. You get older and you control your own schedule. That's and you work and you have all these other things. And so you're like, with the time that I'm not being told or have to do something, I just want to sit.
That's
which
true.
is a little sad, but...
Well, but it's also a stress thing too, right? Of like, yeah, we played because we weren't worried about bills.
Yeah.
Versus like, I spent all day trying to, cancel my DirecTV or something. I literally just want to go lay on the couch. And I get that. I'm talking through that, where it's just like, yeah, I'm exhausted because of stressful activities.
Yeah. This is one thing that I really like to do is just lay in the grass and look up at the sky and watch the clouds roll through. It takes me back to my childhood so much, where I used to just like walk and you literally had nothing to do that day and you would just lay in the grass and talk with your friends and look up and that moment always takes me back to childhood, where you're like, I don't have any cares, I don't have any stresses right now, I'm just laying in the grass. And I'm trying to replicate that more. One of the hobbies I'm getting into this winter is astronomy. So I got a telescope. Ooh. And now that I'm thinking about it, that's almost like my version of play, where like
that's what a hobby is, though.
Yeah, but I only do this one on nights where I have a completely open night. I don't look at my watch, right? I just grab my telescope, I drive out to a field, and when I'm done looking, I'm done. Like sometimes hobbies, right, are like, okay, we're going to do this for 30 minutes or an hour. Like this one, I want to sort of keep a little bit sacred, where it's just me looking up at the stars. It's just me out there looking at the sky. I'm not checking clocks. It's just being.
Yeah. That's cool. One could argue that we're playing right now.
Hey.
But I've thought about this too of you know what? Instead of watching TV, why don't I just go, even just like you're sort of saying, is just put on background music and just lay on the couch and just like let your mind wander. Just let it unravel. You could even, if something pops into your head that goes, I have to do that later, I don't want to forget, just write it down and then go back to what you were doing. I think I'm just starting to see TV, especially... Well, let me back up, because you and I have talked about this, but just for the listeners. There's a big difference between sitting down to watch something, like a show with your significant other or a sporting event, versus I'm turning the TV on like in the absence of doing something because I don't have anything better to do. Those are very different. And I'm really only talking about turning it on because I can't think of anything else to do. That's what I'm trying to now look at my schedule and go, that time was just a black hole. I could have done anything, literally anything. And even if it's just like you're saying, go to a park and just like chill. That you're doing the same. It's almost the same thing, but to me that sounds like it'd be more fulfilling. I don't know.
Well, what's funny is you describing like laying on the couch and listening to music, and then whenever a thought comes down, you just kind of write it down and then go back. To me, I was like, you just described meditating.
Yeah. That kind of, yeah. I mean, that's what it kind of is. But even that is like, okay, but you can look after an hour and be like, oh, something came out of that. Versus just watching a mindless show. And you know what? Maybe you fall into a movie and you're like, I never would have watched that. That movie was pretty good. That's fine. I'm not trying to like shit on all TV watching, but just it can become excessive very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
That was a good aside. Oh, please go.
Well, your point of like, I thought you were going to go with this and you went a different way, but I want to go back to it and touch on it of like, listening to music used to be a hobby in itself. Like you would put a record on and sit with your friends in a room, and the what you were doing for the next hour was listening to the album. And I think about that because, boy, 2 or 3 years ago, I kicked around a project. I got the same itch that you got of like, I want to be creative. I'm consuming too much. I want to go do something creative. And so I started writing a music blog. It never actually made it out. It never published. But what I would do is I would sit down and just listen to an album. Like that was what I was doing with my time. And it was it was cool because I kind of felt like, this is what people used to do in the 70s. Like where they would buy a new record and go home and tell their friends and come over and let's put the record on. And it was just a cool experience. It makes me think about too, there's something called, I think it's been called a music bath, where you sit in a dark room and just play a song and you just listen. Like that is the whole point, is to just soak in the music.
You're taking so we've moved music to such a background thing. Yes. you're taking it and placing it back in the foreground.
Yeah. You should, the next time that you find yourself having an itch to watch television, you should just sit in a dark room and throw on an old Yellow Card album or
That
something.
actually sounds awesome. Yeah.
Especially you being the music guy who writes your kind of own, dabbled on the own musician side.
Yeah.
I would love to hear what your experience is with that.
Yeah, I will do that actually. That's a really, really good idea. And I have last maybe comment on this. I had a friend who used to tell me that some nights she would just eat dinner and then like sit on her floor and listen to music. And at the time I was like, what? Like you weren't doing something else, or like there was a sporting event on you could have been watching. And I have to say now, roughly a decade later, I'm like, I get it. Now I totally get what you were talking about.
Living in the moment.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's we have a couple more things here to get to. So let's move on to just our last sort of timely thing, which actually by the time this airs this won't be timely at all, but for us this will be kind of a fun exercise. So this happened maybe a week and a half ago now. I don't know. News is so fast.
The article you sent me that I have not read yet is November 24th, 2021.
Okay, perfect. Yep. So what we're going to talk about here is Sweden, which is a country kind of near and dear to my heart. I've been there many times, and I love it there. I love the Swedish people. They had their first female prime minister, and that lasted for 7 whole hours. And so it's a little bit of a ridiculous situation, and coming from an American political standpoint, this makes absolutely no sense to me. So, and you just said something really important, which is you have not read this or really know much about the story. So this is going to be really fun. Okay, and this is coming from the AP, but I found this on Yahoo News, and it looks like it's coming from Denmark, or their version of the AP. This also may not be an English first language speaker, so there's some funny things in the article, but that might be why, but just maybe know that going in. But okay, so I'm going to read, this is a very short article, so I'm just going to kind of take this paragraph by paragraph for you, Zach. So hours after being tapped as Sweden's first female prime minister, Magdalena Andersson, I'm guessing, hopefully that's right, resigned Wednesday after suffering a budget defeat in parliament, and her coalition partner, the Greens, which I believe is like her party, left the two-party minority government. So their party, she got elected, and then they had a vote on a budget. Her party lost, and so she quit, effectively.
Well, okay, so that she just wasn't happy with what I'm hearing is that she wasn't happy with the budget defeat and was like, well, all right, if I can't do it with the money, then
she'll
I'm
explain herself a little bit further, but that's exactly what happened. Okay, so it says that the government's own proposal was rejected in favor of one presented by the opposition, which includes a right-wing populist. This is going to make this confusing. The party's called Sweden Democrats, but that's right-wing populism. So maybe I'll call it like the Swedish right.
Sure.
Okay, so and this is important. So the sentence ends with, this budget was presented by the opposition that includes the right-wing populist Sweden Democrats, Swedish right. Sweden's third largest party is rooted in a neo-Nazi movement. Now, at first, I assume that they're talking about the party previously mentioned in the previous sentence, but it's really
Swedish,
funny to just be like, oh, by the way, there's a third party and they're Nazis. Anyways, back to the two that we're actually talking about. So when I first read this, I was like,
Sweden.
Yeah, when I first read it, I was like, what does a third Nazi party have to do with any of this? But I think they're referring to the Swedish right, as I'm calling it. But I thought that was funny. Okay, so the vote was 154 to 143 in favor of the opposition's budget. So that's the Swedish right. So Andersson, the prime minister, female prime minister, leader of the Social Democratic Party, again, like get some names that are more opposed to each other, but decided it was best to step down from the post more than 7 hours after, which by the way, more than 7 hours, it could have been 50 hours, but so that's a poorly written. My understanding is it was 7,
yeah,
but it should have been like less than 8 hours afterwards, because There's so many numbers that are more than 7.
Joe Biden has been president for more than 7
for
hours.
more than 7 hours. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but it was roughly 7 hours. And here you go. So she said, for me, it's about respect, but I also do not want to lead a government where there may be grounds to question the legitimacy, which from an American perspective is like, I don't understand what you're really talking about. You vote on a budget and then you just get the budget, right? Like, what's illegitimate about that?
The only thing I can think of a little bit here, and again, I'm commenting halfway through the article, this reminds me a little bit of the UK Prime Minister that after there was the vote to leave the European Union, he basically like resigned after that.
That's true.
I'm not leading the country through this thing that I think is a terrible idea. I will be stepping down.
Okay. That's probably a fair comparison. Keep that in mind as we go through this.
Okay.
Okay. So Anderson, who was finance minister before briefly becoming prime minister for just more than 7 hours, informed the parliamentary speaker, Andreas Norlin, that she is still interested in leading a social democratic one-party government. So that makes it sound like, well, I don't get to be a dictator, so I'm quitting.
I'll still be the leader of this group, but if
it's
I need
ever
to play
a
nice
one-party government, you come find me.
If I need to make compromises, I'm not interested in this position.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's what she means, but that's how it reads, and I think it's hilarious. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit. So that particular person says that they need to discuss this situation. And, okay, so here now we're going to get into a little bit of the explanation. So Anderson, who is now the former prime minister, said that a coalition government should resign if a party chooses to leave the government, which again is like, so her party, due to a budget defeat, stopped backing her. And so now she's saying it's the right thing to do to quit. And this is also despite the fact, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, so she's making it sound like my party quit because they didn't get the budget they wanted, so now I have to quit, which coming from an American perspective is like bonkers.
Yeah, it took me a second to really land what you were saying with her saying a government should resign if a party chooses to leave the government. Like if we choose to quit, you gotta take the whole government down and recount.
To relate it to our situation, this would be like Joe Biden gets elected. The Republicans maybe have a majority. This is not true, obviously, but let's say the Republicans have a majority in like Congress, and they hand Joe Biden a budget. And so the Democratic Party goes, no, we're out. And Joe Biden, you should resign too because we're quitting the government. Like that's a comparison which sounds insane.
Well, and then Joe Biden would say, because we decided to step away from this party, then a coalition government should resign because we're choosing to step away. Like the government basically needs to do something. Like because the Democrats are saying, no, we don't want to do this anymore. We're going to step away. Now the whatever coalition was formed needs to be like, guys, we're actually going to step down the whole government. But you acknowledged this in the beginning, and I want to just acknowledge this too. As an American, I am extremely uneducated in a parliamentary system. I just wrote down like YouTube. I should look up YouTube videos on how parliamentary systems work.
This might be perfectly. All Swedish people are like, "Yep, absolutely, it was the right thing." And just from my perspective, though, this is like insane.
Bonkers.
Yeah. So now I'm gonna let's see. Should resign. Okay, yeah. So we just read her quote about how a coalition government should resign. So the next line says, and we're getting close to the end, even though the Green Party pulled its support for her government, it said it is prepared to stand behind Anderson in a new vote to tap a prime minister. So they're saying even though everybody resigned and she quit, we would vote for her again. But the Greens said it was in the best interest of the party to pull support after the budget defeat. So this just sounds... And by the way, as an aside, if you're the first female prime minister, I would think you'd be much more gung-ho of like, oh, I'll make anything work. I'm going to show you how good of a leader I am. This is a big step for women. Those types of things versus being like, oh, our budget didn't get through. I guess I should quit.
Well, I'm trying to think of what is like a reasonable thing that's happening here that would make this make more sense. And one obviously would be a deeper understanding of the parliamentary. But if they're the Green Party, if a budget came out that was like, hey, we're going to throw a ton of money at coal or like bad energy ideas, I could see the Party being like, we don't want to be involved in this.
Okay. We're going to get into this a little bit of specific. Now, I don't know all of it, but I just will read what the article says.
Sure.
I think you're starting, though, to come up with legitimate reasons. Yeah, of being like, I'm not even going to work with this. However, if you're in charge, wouldn't you be like, I'll make sure this gets allocated better than the way that it's sort of written here because this is ridiculous. Like, shouldn't staying in charge wouldn't that be more powerful of an opposition? To something you don't like?
This is a terrible answer, but you could also think like, I'm going to stay in charge and try and line item veto or screw up these plans as much as possible.
Which now we're sounding like such Americans of just like, how can I screw the other party over? Which, these people they do it differently.
Bad ideology or thinking, but if that's what you think is the right thing to do for the country overall, I mean, this is a little bit of, again, this is a very American thinking of, I think about this a lot from a democratic republic where it used to be that I thought it would be best that we get rid of the republic and just have everybody vote. Like once blockchain becomes safe enough and we could have everybody vote on their phones, it would be interesting to say, all right, every Tuesday at 7:00, log in that hour, you get to read what, and vote on whatever you want for the country. But it sort of doesn't work because I think it would get to a system where people would vote for all the things that would just benefit them and not, nobody would vote for the Postal Service to deliver in Alaska because it costs too much money.
Well, that's exactly the reason that we have the system we do, because this happened in California where the cities voted to divert all water to the cities because they had the power to do so. And everyone else was like, we can't. Like, if it was strictly a democratic vote, they would all lose their water, which doesn't make any sense. Like, that's not good for everybody. Okay,
bring us back home here.
Yeah, a couple more lines and then we'll close this part out, but this is just so funny. So it says earlier in the day, Anderson said she could govern the country with the opposition's budget. So she set this up by being like, well, if we lose, I could still govern. And then all of the other stuff happened and was like, you know what? Never mind. I'm out.
I will resign.
So yeah, she, just couldn't keep her mind straight, I guess. But okay, so the next part here, I'll wrap it up with this, but this is what you were talking about. The approved budget was based on the government's own proposal. Let's see. Let me skip a couple parts here. Okay, so the approved budget. Sorry, so the one that won aims at reducing taxes, increasing salaries for police officers, and more money to different sectors of Sweden's judiciary system. So that's kind of what you're saying of like she's not happy with those things, which don't sound that bad, but and so maybe that's part of the reason that her party was like, we're not going to have it.
I hate reduced taxes. Yeah. I like paying more.
Yeah, those police officers don't deserve to make any money.
But yeah, obviously we don't know the whole story there. But it's so funny though that she said, "Oh yeah, I can do this with the opposition's budget." Well, we have news. The opposition's budget actually passed. And you know what? I don't think I can do this.
I don't think I can do that. Yeah. So, anyways, I'll leave it there. There's a couple more sentences, but I don't think they're relevant.
That's why I wonder where I was going. Was thinking about, again, I was sort of Americanizing this in my head of once you become president, I would imagine you still get to retain like classified or top secret access, or there's I don't know if this is real or not because this is a National Treasure reference, but like the Book of Secrets, right? Like I'm sure the president knows what's in Area 51 or any, got to hear all of Nixon's tapes and stuff like that. Do you think she gets like still top classified Swedish accent?
That's a good question, actually. Yeah. So now that she's resigned, but she's just like, you know what? I'm going to do some light reading and figure out all the secrets.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Like, I am Prime Minister Emeritus. I'm the former Prime Minister. I'm going to start my book tour early.
Well, but they're saying that they would vote for her again, so she might still end up being the prime minister. I would laugh really hardly if they vote her in again, they do another budget, the budget loses, and she's like, you know what, let's just call it. I'm out again. So yeah, so there's that. That was the story, which doesn't sound that bad, but when you run it through an American lens, it sounds insane. Like it makes no sense.
Let's back up to. I was so focused on the Swedish, the fact that the prime minister resigned. How about the fact that if you run the government, you must have a majority, right? Because that's how you came to form a coalition. So you're telling me that enough people in your own government were like, nope, we think the other guy's plan is better?
So I don't know that I mentioned this, but she didn't get voted in. She was like a successor. Their other prime minister stepped down, and she moved up to fill the spot. But still, to think the idea that you have collections of people who formed the coalition in the first place because you'd think they're more like-minded, right? And then I'm going to create an us versus them dichotomy, which is not how I like to think in politics, but it'll be easy for this explanation of like, okay, we've got them who have apparently roots in neo-Nazism if this sentence that is plopped in the middle of the paragraph is true. You're telling me, and again, like, this is glossing over a lot of details, but in my mind it's sort of simplifying down to, you're telling me that the group that formed the government goes, you know what, we don't actually like your plan, we like the other guy's plan that we kept out of the coalition of the government better, and we want to vote for that budget. Yeah, you'd think to even put her in the spot, there has to be some sort of majority, because it probably could have gone to somebody else.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not even thinking of this as like for her though, because this is just a budget proposal. So in my mind, it is like if the Republicans in the House proposed a bill and more Democrats voted for it than Republicans.
Well, but you have two things happening. You have her becoming prime minister and then a budget vote later. So there's some sort of majority that made her prime minister, right? Mm-hmm. So then those people are turning around and not voting then for her budget. They're voting for the other budget, which I think is the part that you're highlighting on.
Yes, exactly. I'm highlighting on the fact that whether or not she's the prime minister, let's just take that aside for a second. We've got a coalition of like-minded individuals who formed the government who thought that their own budget proposal was worse than what the opposition came up with.
Yeah, there must be people, it must be less us versus them there, because it has to be. If people are thinking like, yeah, she's the best person for the job, I really like her, but I'm going to vote for this other budget.
Yeah, well, this is where I think parliamentary, right? You have different bands or parties that come together to form the government, and it must be that some party is more moderate that was part of the coalition government. But still, this just kind of blows my mind where they were like, yeah, we formed this coalition, but guess what? I'm going to vote for the other side's budget.
To her, no to their budget.
Yeah.
Which would never, that's just, it would never happen here. But
I don't know. I'm going to go do some research on parliament.
It's a wild article. And she still might end up being the prime minister, like down the road.
That's wild.
So we've been going, we're about 15 minutes here. Do you want to tack your last subject on, or should we wrap it up there?
I want to go with a slightly different question because I don't have a lot of follow-ups. I think the topic that I did want to talk about just as a table setter is consciousness and the universe, and I don't think we can do that quickly.
So we'll tease that for next episode.
We'll tease that. That'll be a topic for a later conversation. But we touched on music, and I referenced earlier in this podcast that you are a musician. You've put out some great tracks under the name Limit None. Here's my question for you: as you have written your own music and produced your own songs, what do you start with, lyrics or music? What is your kind of just tweet kind of version or the short version of your process? Because I've heard some people do it this way, some people do it that way.
Really interesting question. I typically do lyrics last, actually, which is not necessarily the best way to do it. I like to start with guitar, chords, things like that. Then I typically layer drums. Then I'll typically and I'm doing that leaving space for lyrics, but then I'll go back and fill that space with lyrics. Now, I've started challenging myself to do things in a different order. So one of the songs recently, I think I started with lyrics, which was my most recent one, and then did drums and then did guitar last. So I flipped it around. I've also thought about just go write the most simple thing you can think of. versus I typically complicate things because I like the sound of, fun guitar like riffs or arpeggiating synths and things like that. So I may be overcomplicating it, but I kind of think it sounds cooler. But I've thought, write the most simple song and then fill it with complicated lyrics or something like that. So there's this, writing music is like building a puzzle. And
That's a cool
I
analogy.
typically do it one way, which is, I think I said guitar, drums, lyrics. That's how I usually build the puzzle. But I've tried to go, you know what, start with this piece and then see how the other pieces go in. And then mixing and mastering as a whole, that becomes a 3D puzzle at that point.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see if by going a different route, you get a completely different song kind of approach of like, oh, this is something that sounds totally different from my other stuff because I started with lyrics and then did drums and then finished with guitar or something like that. It's just something I've never sat down to truly take a serious crack at constructing a song at that puzzle. So I'm always interested as to how people sort of start it. I know I've seen videos of Paul McCartney from the Beatles playing guitar riffs and kind of just, he doesn't know the words yet. He's just kind of humming along of like, this is what it's going to sound like when we do put words
A lot of
together.
people do that. I've seen Tom DeLonge do the same thing where he goes, this is the melody. Taylor Swift does this too. She'll have like a chord progression and then hum a melody or just say like, just babble syllables and things.
Yeah.
And then circle back and write words into that. I don't know that I've ever actually done that.
That'd be fun to try. And also, it makes me think too, there's the song Brick by Ben Folds 5. And Ben Folds talks about, that's his most popular song. I don't think he wrote the chorus. He got it from somebody else as a recommendation. They either wrote it for him or gave it to him. And he's like, yeah, I'll just never understand what makes a good pop hook. Because he's like, this is the fact that this is what fits so well and what people love to sing. He's like, it's tough to hit that mark.
Something that he never would have come up with. Is that what he's sort of saying?
Yeah, I think he's like, if I understand the story correctly, he's saying like, I didn't come up with this. Somebody else wrote this pop hook and it's my most popular, famous song. He's like, I just don't understand why or how, like what the masses sort of want. He's written a bunch of other good songs that people like, but it's just interesting to me that his most popular, kind of most well-known song is one that he didn't write the kind of famous hook for.
I'll give you a quick, so once you have a song written, so you've built a puzzle and you have a song written, it's two-dimensional, it's flat, right? Like these are the guitar, these are the lyrics. It's a very two-dimensional song. Mixing and mastering is taking that two-dimensional song and putting it in a three-dimensional space.
That is really cool to think about.
Yeah, because you layer things because you want maybe the guitars louder than the drums, or so you have like volumes, which I think of moving things. If you think of a box, you're moving things from the bottom to
more dimensions.
From the bottom to the top. Yep. So you want, your voice needs to be louder than usually everything else, like that should stick out, and maybe you have these softer bass lines and things. So that's up and down for me. But now you also introduce stereo music. You can move sounds around you, and so that becomes like so for example, you can hear something in one ear and not the other ear, right? Like they might just have a guitar playing in the left speaker, and that becomes your left to right space of, do I want my guitars coming at me as if they're in front of me and I'm listening, or are they on the sides of me? And those are all the things you have to think about while you're mixing and mastering, and it's wild.
That's really cool. I've never thought about music like this before. I mean, I've thought about the mono versus stereo and like how it's cool to hear. There's a track that I really like that has like it's being at like a motorcycle race. It's like a techno song where it's supposed to sound like you're at a motorcycle race, and so you can hear the motorcycles go from very far left to very far right, like kind of Doppler effect sound. And so like I've thought about that, of these cool almost environments that you build from a sound standpoint, but I've never thought about it as going up and down in terms of like depth to surface.
That's just how my mind
voice.
Perceives it as I'm doing
cool.
the mixing. Yeah, it's like how loud do you want things is sort of like up and down in the box, and then where do you actually want them physically in space? Like usually your drums is in the middle, but you could do. Well, see, but drums are weird too because you can have like a cymbal in one ear and a cymbal in the other because it makes the kit feel a little more three-dimensional. But yeah, and then you can do things like I've put guitars in the middle and then doubled that track and put them in the sides. So I'm getting hit from like 3 sides of guitars. And these are all just creative decisions. Like you can just do whatever you want.
Wow.
It's kind of daunting, actually. But,
Well, I'm just thinking about how much time you can dump into one track.
Yeah. It's easy to just be like, oh, 6 hours have gone by. It didn't even feel like it.
Yeah, I've done that when I used to make films, and just you have a narrative that you can tell, and if you put different scenes in different orders, it changes the whole narrative. And so, like, yeah, I've been sitting in editing labs before where I'm trying to come up with what's the best story I want to tell with the pieces I have, and all of a sudden you look at the clock and you're like, oh, well, all right, it is now 2 a.m, and I'm sitting in this editing lab.
That's probably a good comparison too of like, I have these pieces, I need to fit them together somehow.
Yeah.
Well,
cool. Well, I'm glad I've asked. Thanks for sharing some of your creative process.
I love talking about it, and honestly, people don't really ask me very often, so thanks for asking.
Of course.
Hopefully everybody enjoyed that.
Yeah, I feel like our 2 topics, our 2 timely tee-offs took us in a lot of different places here. So this was, I was chasing rabbits a little bit, but thanks for bringing us back and for going on some of those journeys. I think we hit some cool gems in this one.
Well, and it's funny because we were talking before we started and said, yeah, we'll get these 2 topics kind of out of the way and then dig into the other bullet points. And those 2 topics filled the whole time. So yeah, it's just kind of funny how it works.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Zach, hit him with a closing line.
The closing line, do the most good.
Everybody take that and do whatever you want with it. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.